This is the best damn sports show, period.
Man, it's just great being here at Universal Studios. Anybody want to go ride the Toon Lagoon?
Chris, we didn't come here for the rides, man.
We're here for the best damn wrestling special.
Wrestling? I hate wrestling. Wrestling sucks. It's fake. It's stupid. Those big dumb wrestlers, they couldn't hurt anybody.
Oh, yeah? Hey, Rose.
You got knocked the out.
Oh, great job, Jeff. Will $50 cover it?
Make it 100 and I'll have a Abyss make Chris disappear permanently.
All right, keep the change.
You got it. Wow. Take care of him, Abyss. Cox, I think you need to get the garbage out of here.
Hey, loved you in Pulp Fiction, man. Loved you. Jeff, I may need you to host next week. Can you read a teleprompter?
I'll give it a shot.
It's easy, man.
Let's go have a great show.
All right, let's do it!
Oh, fuck. Welcome to episode number 121 of Something Else. It is the best damn wrestling special ever. And my name is Arya, and I'm joined by the person that caused the chaos to join with me, the person who approved the chaos, my co-host, Cyndi. Cyndi, how the hell are you doing today?
I'm great. I watched both of these specials. We're going to do the other one next week. And this took me back to when I saw this originally back in 2004.
I that was the plan. I was just going to watch them both back to back and get it out of the way. I was so fucking angry after watching the first show. I'm like, I can't fucking do this. I'm going to strangle my television, and it's not my television's fault. So,
Can we give some backstory about why we're doing this?
sure. I mean, we've kind of discussed that, but basically, in 2002 TNA land, September 4th is a Best of the X Division show, and then next week is they're skipping a week due to the 1 year anniversary of 9/11. And since I put the self-imposed rule that I want to do I want to do the anniversary date of the shows. So it's like I didn't want to jump ahead to the 18th today. I wanted to wait till the 18th to do that. So we were discussing what to do to fill in the 2 weeks, and we decided to go with these two, honestly not really remembered very well, and for very good reason, Fox Sports Net specials as part of the best damn sports show, period, which was Fox Sports Net's, it wasn't really Sports Center, but it was basically their sports themed talk show. It ran for like 5 or 6 years.
Oh, it ran for 8 years.
Okay, then. It ran for 8 years. And yeah, I don't remember. I remember watching a little bit of this back in the day, but I don't remember hating it as much as I do now. I think it's because we've convinced ourselves that 2004 to 2006 was like peak TNA. That was like the only bad thing about 2004 to 2006 TNA was that Jeff Jarrett wouldn't give up the fucking world title. Everything else was just amazing. And this show, and you say next week is better, I guess we'll see. But this show really drove home the fact that TNA has always been and will always be TNA.
Essentially, to clarify a lot of this about why this took place, this was during the time TNA actually got on Fox Sports Net, and some changes had to be made to the show. For Impact, they had, for the matches, a 10-minute time limit for non-title matches and a 30-minute time limit for title matches. And if there was a draw, then they would go to a panel of judges in the back and a winner will be decided.
And they would actually have the Fox box like you would see for every real sports event ever, with the match and counting down how much time is left. I did forget about that when watching this show, but it is important to remember that they never brought it up. Not that that was ever a worry during this show. But yeah, this show is 90 minutes long, but without commercials, it's about 63, 64 minutes. And there were times this show is harder to get through than those 2-hour pay-per-views we've been doing otherwise.
It's true. For me, I just flash back because here's the backstory for me is why I was like, okay, we'll do this. These two specials actually got me hooked in watching TNA.
So it actually brought in one fan.
Yeah.
That is, I don't want to say it's impossible to believe, but yeah, like I'm honestly surprised that you watched this show, the one that we're about to review, and you thought to yourself, I need to see more of this. And I'll admit it right off the bat, if you ignore all of the shit that is not wrestling and you just watch, there's 5 or 6 matches, by and large, they're fun matches. There was actually, I think, 3 X Division matches. And in a 1-hour show, you have 3 fucking X Division matches. That sounds like a recipe for a good show. But the non-wrestling shit was just so fucking bad. I was just screaming. And so I want to rant a little bit, Cyndi, if you don't mind.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So whenever you ask somebody or you talk to somebody about, how TNA sucked forever, they'll always tell you, well, Dixie didn't know what she was doing, and Vince Russo was an idiot. And every so often they'll throw in some Hogan and Bischoff just to round it out to a nice foursome. And when you ask people about Jeff Jarrett, they'll basically tell you, well, Jeff was doing his best to right the ship and make sure everything was smooth sailing, yada, yada, yada. Jeff Jarrett was the final say-so in creative. That's what they'll always tell you when Vince Russo wrote all these goddamn horrific shows that Russo would get blamed for, but everyone would just forget that Jarrett was the overarching hand over everything. Jeff Jarrett, this show was when I suddenly got all the hate for Jeff Jarrett as a wrestling promoter, booker, whatever the hell you want to call him. Vince Russo had nothing to do with this fucking show. Vince Russo, at this point, was an on-screen TV character and did not write or book the shows at all. I swear, it really happens. He hasn't had anything to do with the writing since the first time they tried bringing Hogan in a year earlier. This is like Dusty is the booker, and Jeff Jarrett again is still the overarching hand that makes sure everything goes the way he wants it to be gone. At the end of the fucking day, this whole thing is a shit show, and it's fucking on Jeff Jarrett. It's like, yeah, Russo did his fair share thing. Dixie sucked. Hogan sucked. Bischoff sucked. Dusty, Dusty's reputation went back up when he went to WWE. But people forget, 2004 Dusty Rhodes was considered a bitter old man. And, watching these shows, his fucking ego was out of this fucking world. It was still 1988. And 1988 to Dusty was still 1977 to Dusty. Jeff Jarrett, he gave a shit about one thing, and that was making sure that he was the world champion or that whoever was the world champion was being set up to lose it to him. That was the only fucking thing Jeff Jarrett ever worried about. And when we go through these TNA shows, you'll see that typically the storyline that is the closest to making the most sense and is the most logical is Jarrett's, because that's the only one he gives a shit about, especially after Jerry loses the power battle to Russo in a few months. It becomes Jeff Jarrett cares about his own fucking thing and doesn't give a shit about the rest of the show. And, I'm sorry, this was the show that really was the tipping point for me, because it's he allowed this fucking show to air the way it was. He fucking allowed that. The first fucking thing you heard on this professional wrestling show, this special that's supposed to hook new fans who may not have been watching Impact on Friday, which, by the way, we'll get to that later on. This show that's supposed to hook brand new fans, the first thing they say is have one of the hosts of the show talk about how fake wrestling is. And if you think, okay, Jeff Jarrett hit him with the guitar, Abyss took him to do whatever the hell they were going to do, and that's the last time we'll see that man whose name is Chris Rose. That's the last time we'll see him, right? No, that's not the last time we'll see him. And honestly, at the end of the show, I didn't know if the wrestling is fake shit was better or worse than Tom Arnold's brilliant commentary during the main event. And Jeff Jarrett allowed this to air for his company. And you can say, well, it's Dixie's company. Yeah, but Dixie, even at her worst, was as close to hands off as you were ever going to get in an owner of a company. This was all Jarrett. And yeah. So
I'm not gonna lie, they built up to this for a couple of weeks before this even aired, and the storyline is that everybody was eager to do it. Chris was very hesitant. There's going to be some of the backstory that gets brought up on this show having to do with Monty Brown and Bryan Cox.
So, yeah. Bryan Cox, who's a former NFL player. By the way, Chris Rose, in case you're like me and had no idea who some of these people are, Chris Rose is a sportscaster who would one day become the number 7 play-by-play broadcaster for the NFL on Fox, which admittedly is still a higher position than me, but he hasn't called that many NFL games more than I have. And Leanne Tweeden, who I honestly forgot was even a part of the Best Damn Sports Show period. Like, I knew all the guys. I forgot about her. She is a model who is married to Chris Daughtry, whatever, however you pronounce that.
Mm-hmm.
John Salley, former Detroit Piston. Bryan Cox, former NFL player. Tom Arnold, formerly married to Roseanne. Those are your hosts, in case you're not sure who those people were.
The thing about it is they also didn't take sports. It was the first show that I can remember that really didn't take sports. They took it serious, but they also had fun with it. Like a lot of the sports shows at the time, it was like, oh, these monsters of the gridiron. Everything is 100% serious and everything. They pandered to fans, casual sports fans, and it worked. Chris Rose, and also there's a game show connection to this show.
All right.
There's a couple of them. One where Impact Tapes was also the place where a lot of Nickelodeon game shows aired or taped.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't Guts taped here?
Yep. Guts, Get the Picture. What Would You Do?
Oh my God. I know what you said, but I thought for a second you said, what would you do? Like, what would a Jewish person do?
I'll just leave that one alone.
Yes.
And the second one is Tom Arnold himself. Because he helped create game show history.
How on earth did he do that?
Remember when Family Feud had the bullseye format?
Yes, I do.
He is the only person, part of the only team to win the full jackpot of $20,000.
Interesting. I honestly don't remember anyone ever doing that, but good for him.
it was part of a special that he did with Roseanne. It was Roseanne versus the Jackie Thomas Show. And I think it was him and Martin Mull that did it.
I mean, Martin Mull, he's a smart cookie.
Yep.
Oh Lord. By the way, even though we're talking about this show, which is by the way, it's from November 10th, 2004, so it's after the TNA Victory Road pay-per-view, but it was taped October 27th, 2004, before the TNA Victory Road pay-per-view. So they basically spoiled to their most hardcore fans the results of the major matches. We'll say that. But even though we're in November 2004, I'm still going to tell you what happened this week in Jerry Jarrett's book. So this is between August 28th and September 4th, 2002. So I open it up, or I scroll to the page more specifically, and the section that's honestly the key section to basically the entire story of TNA here. It starts with 2 long paragraphs about how Jerry Jarrett believes in God. And I'm like, oh my God, this is one of those books now. And I'm getting ready to move to the next day when something catches my eye. And the reason why he mentions that he believes in God is because they suddenly discovered that their PR agent has money. Dixie Carter is an amazing lady who does their PR, and her dad has a shit ton of money, and specifically owns a $1 billion company and is actually interested in investing in the company. And so they flew to Dallas to meet with Bob Carter, and Bob, I don't know, like, what Dixie, like, either this is like the greatest meeting ever, or Dixie really schmoozed her parents, or both, because I don't know how many meetings you could have about funding where you leave that day and like the other guy's like, oh yeah, we'll send you an offer sheet later today or tomorrow regarding our investment. It's like, Jesus Christ, that was quick. But yeah, so things aren't official yet, but after one meeting in Dallas, we have some new investors in TNA. Or they're not official yet, but we're going to have some new investors in TNA. And so this is, I guess it's now the rebirth of TNA. But I did it to laugh because in Jerry Jarrett's book, he misspells a lot of people's names. Like, a lot of people's names. But he spells Dixie Carter's husband Serge's name correctly. I was like, really? That one he got right. But anyway, that was the big news this week. They found Dixie Carter. They realized that the lady they already had working for them had money. And here we are. And I actually remember from, I think it was the History of TNA Year 1 DVD or the 50 Greatest Moments or whatever. They did an interview with Dixie, and she said that she was in the same hotel, or like when she was younger, she stayed in the same apartment complex as Jeff Jarrett when Jeff worked for World Class, and mentioned that I think it was her stepmother or her mother's maiden name, whatever, their last name was Jarrett. And it sounds like the most completely contrived bullshit thing ever. Well, if it isn't something she made up at the last minute, because Jerry Jarrett in 2002 noted that in his book, that Dixie stayed at the same place that Jeff did.
Wow.
Yes. That's almost as wacky as when I hear the story, the very real story, that Taylor Swift babysat Jeff's kids.
And that is true. And I'm kind of shocked that around 2009, when she started to get big, well, big in Nashville, and
yeah,
before she crossed over, I want to say she had a little bit of crossover appeal, like I think it was with 15. That Jarrett wasn't like, hey, we're doing a show and we would like you to come and perform the national anthem.
To be fair, that was probably around the time that he got kicked out of the company for sleeping with Karen Angle.
Yeah.
That's always the most fucked up story too. It's like Kurt and Karen got divorced. It's not like they were still together. And I already spent 20 minutes bitching about Jeff Jarrett, and I'm about to defend him. Kurt and Karen were divorced. So who gives a shit if Jeff Jarrett decided to hook up with her and they got a relationship? But that was apparently enough to kick Jeff out of his own company. So I'm starting to think this is the Tuesday show. We're 22 minutes in, and now we're going to finally start talking about the actual show.
I think we put it off long enough. So if you don't mind, I'll lead this one.
Sure thing.
So Borash, so we have the actual intro to the show, and they break down what's going to happen with the crew. Tom is going to referee a match between Tio and Puppet. They are back.
We can't get fucking rid of these people.
And then we have Bryan Cox. He'll be taking on the alpha male Monty Brown.
Mm-hmm.
John Salley will be challenging Three Live Crew to a game of horse for his managerial debut. Leanne Tweeden is going to interview Dusty Rhodes. And Chris Rose does something, as I have noted down.
See, they talked about everything else, and they mentioned John Salley, and it took way too long for me to figure out what the hell was going on with this. Because they were just like, he's going to play horse, and there are two hot girls involved. I'm like, okay, he's going to play horse against these two hot girls, and what the hell does that have anything to do with wrestling? And I note this is my exact sentence I wrote. I get this is an episode of Best Damn Sports Show, period, but it's a fucking TNA wrestling show, and we have someone on the show announcing wrestling is fake. Yeah, and that
wearing the shirt.
Yes. And Leanne is going to go hang out with Dusty Rhodes later.
Yep.
This, go ahead.
Then we get to the actual intro, where the crew is in the TNA ring, and Chris Rose tries to be the biggest heel and insulting the fans by saying wrestling is faker than Pam Anderson's chest and Tom Arnold's wife's orgasms. Yeah. These are statements that I would have understood giving from someone like Tom Arnold, who is supposed to be the shit poster of the group, not the guy who's supposed to be the straight man of the group. Chris Rose is the straight man of the group.
Really?
So it throws everybody off. Yeah.
I honestly, I could not have watched this and thought that Chris Rose was not the heel of the group. Like the regular heel of the group.
True. However, fair play to Tom, because he gives it back by saying at least he gives Chris's wife real orgasms.
Oh.
So Chris runs down what's going to happen. We already talked about it, so we're going to skip over that. And then Roddy Piper comes out. I completely forgot Roddy Piper was around in TNA in 2004.
I seriously thought we were about to have an episode of Scared Straight, because it's like this was one of those times where it's like, if you watched the talk shows back in the day around this time, there would always be an episode once a month or so where teens would be taken to a prison and get screamed at by actual criminals to make them cry and back down and promise to be nice to their mom now. And I am convinced that's what Roddy Piper was doing.
It seemed that way. I also want to go a step further, because I remember episodes of Maury when they were doing that. Going to a prison or going to a boot camp is nothing. When you have fucking New Jack yelling at you.
That would have been something. If they would have brought New Jack in, first of all, they would have had to bleep every other word. But Chris Rose would have been pissing his pants.
Yep.
And if New Jack would have come out in a kilt, Leanne Tweeden would not have screamed that he was wearing a skirt.
Yeah.
And if she did, well, she probably wouldn't be around too much longer.
No. Piper says that Tom Arnold is okay because, quote, anybody that can take a stink face from Roseanne is cool in his book.
I'm still convinced he didn't know who the other two were.
He knew who Salley and Cox were because I think he showed up on Best Damn a week prior.
Okay. I was convinced he didn't because he's just like, you two are great, without any specifics or saying their name or even making a reference to real sports in any way to make me think that he knew who John, Salley, and Bryan Cox were.
Right. And then he lays into Chris Rose. And then I don't know if you were like, oh, thank God he's saying he's actually giving it back to Chris.
I was waiting for the moment that I know happens, but I guess it happens next week. Because they put this on the TNA 50 Greatest Moments of All Time DVD, complete with Chris Rose screaming about how wrestling is fake. It's okay. The DVD also had, as one of the greatest moments in company history, them setting the roof on fire. So, I mean, great is a subjective word to this company.
They made a shirt in regards to that by saying TNA is on fire with the logo on fire. My brother has that shirt.
Well, at least they knew how to make fun of themselves.
Yep. So Chris Rose gets put on blast, gets bitch slapped by Piper, and says that in 24 hours he's going on Piper's pit and will probably die.
Yes. Piper leaves, and the fucking segment hasn't ended yet.
No, because we gotta bring up the other important part, which is Monty Brown versus Bryan Cox. And this is where Best Damn comes into play. Because Monty was a guest on the show. Apparently, during that show, Bryan Cox was going to have the day off, which happens with that type of show sometimes. Sometimes you need a break.
Well, when you have 5 hosts, one can take a day off or two. It's not the world's not going to come to an end. Like inside the NBA, if Shaq's not there, you have Ernie, Kenny, and Chuck.
Or you could do something stupid like these playoffs and have Draymond Green there.
Well, Draymond's been decent, He just keeps getting fined because he keeps, saying stuff an active player is not supposed to be saying.
No, and also choking out players as well.
Pipped. Who doesn't enjoy good choking? Hey, PJ Carlissimo got choked by Latrell Sprewell that time.
That ran Latrell Sprewell out of the league.
For a year. Then he came back for the Knicks.
And sucked.
Well, I was a Bulls fan. In fact, I still am a Bulls fan. So the Knicks sucking was good to me.
Did they lose that year to the Spurs?
The Knicks?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the year of the strike season, and they were the first 8 seed to make the finals.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, it counts, but it's hard to count that season because it's like it was 50 games, and outside of the Bulls who won like 9 games, it's like anybody else could have won the damn thing. But yeah.
Sure.
So yeah, after they show us what happened on the Best Damn Sports Show period, where Bryan Cox showed up and Monty Brown challenged him to a match, so they got held apart by the hosts the co-host, Monty Brown comes out into the impact zone because this show or this segment will never fucking end. Brown calls Bryan Cox fat. Guy took personal offense to, and that brought out the skinniest people on the show, the fucking Naturals, who were not here to defend Bryan Cox for being fat. They decided to throw powder in Monty Brown's face and hit him with a chair. And then Andy Douglas, who's the dark-haired Natural, he cut a promo saying that they are professional wrestling and calls Monty Brown a big, dumb ex-football player, just like Cox, which offended Bryan Cox, and somehow our one-on-one Monty Brown-Bryan Cox match has turned into a tag team match with the Naturals versus Bryan Cox and a mystery partner for tomorrow. And man, oh man, you'll never believe who that mystery partner is, because this one I know.
And we won't spoil the surprise because that's the next show we're going to do.
Yes.
And now we actually get a break.
Nobody out there listening can figure out who Bryan Cox's partner is. Nobody.
No. So they hype up Victory Road 2004 and say it was a great show.
It wasn't, first of all, but I also laughed. They showed almost zero wrestling action and instead showed Jimmy Snuka, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and Randy Savage, which somehow segged into a plug for the next pay-per-view Turning Point in December. I thought that would be the worst plug on the show. I was really, really, really wrong.
Yep.
And then, now that we're 11 minutes into our 64-minute show, actually more because that was before the Victory Road recap, we then have a game called Things You Wouldn't Say to TNA Wrestlers. So Tom Arnold, because he's a babyface, talks shit about Kid Kash, Dallas, who's Lance Archer, and Team Canada, which shockingly brings out Kid Kash, Dallas, and Team Canada, which I didn't take a head count, so I don't know if it was 3 or 4 members of Team Canada, but so it's either 5 or 6 heels coming out. And then before anything could happen, 3 Live Crew hit the ring, and it wasn't until the segment ended that I realized AMW was also there. But they hit the ring for is either a 5-on-5 or a 5-on-6 fight. And ultimately, it was not important to watch the fighting because instead it was more important to watch Scott D'Amore take Chris Rose down as he plugged what else is on the show tonight as Tom Arnold dives on him. We're now 15 minutes into the show.
Well, let's extend the agony.
You have nothing to say about that fantastic segment? You didn't write down any of the hilarious jokes he said about Kid Kash and Dallas and Team Canada?
Oh, I have the best one about Dallas because this was true around this period because I saw Dallas wrestle.
Mm-hmm.
At least when I see Dallas suck, I don't have to watch the Cowboys.
Aha. So I got a question. Did you watch Collision last Saturday? Yesterday as we're taping this?
No, I didn't.
Do you care if I spoil to you a very important backstage segment?
Go for it.
So Lance Archer was just randomly beating up people backstage. It lasted about 15 seconds, and then we went back to the arena and it was never brought up, and Lance Archer was never on the show again. Just by hearing the description of this, does that sound better or worse than this segment?
Better.
Believe me, it wasn't that much better watching it. Because we just come back from commercial and somebody's head is in a one of those giant cases that you put stuff in for a production. And Lance is slamming the doors shut on their heads. which sounds more entertaining than it was.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
God.
will say that Things You Wouldn't Say To is kind of like one of the staples of Best Damn. They had Tom would usually get off some great lines about people. Like, I remember one about Charles Barkley, when Charles Barkley won the Emmy with Inside the NBA for the first time back in 2001. He said, "Hey, congratulations on the Emmy. Why don't you try melting it into an NBA championship ring?"
Aha. It's always hilarious. Like, poor Chuck, you know. I'm sure he doesn't really care. You know, he's making a lot of money right now, and he didn't have to win an NBA ring to get it. He didn't have to jump on Hakeem's shoulders to win 2 titles.
Like John Salley did.
Do you want to take this next segment?
Yeah. So Best Damn is set up where the Spanish announce team usually is. Tom tries to tell the story when Dusty was 19 with Terry Funk in the bathroom, but Chris cuts him off. If you want to hear the story, I think it's the first episode of Legends Roundtable for WWE. Michael PSAs tells the story.
I meant I actually didn't even write that down. I meant the following backstage segment.
Right. So Leanne's talking to Dusty Rhodes. Dusty runs into Shane Douglas, who I forgot was the new backstage announcer for TNA now that they've moved to Florida, which means Scott Hudson no longer shows up, which is sad because he did a damn good job being the backstage announcer for TNA.
Scott Hudson, it's like, it's too bad, you know, not only that WCW went out of business, but like WWE couldn't make up their fucking mind about WCW because Scott Hudson had a real job and he could only take off 1 day a week. And since WWE couldn't make up their fucking mind about this WCW invasion, Scott Hudson ended up just not. He did like 2 or 3 shows, but then that was it. And then TNA comes around and he's in during the weekly pay-per-view era. He shows up 1 or 2 more times later on, but that's about it.
Right, because he could work around that schedule because I think during this time they now tape 2 shows a day.
Yes.
And so he only has to take 1 day off of work every 2 weeks. So it's perfect. He keeps his regular paycheck. He gets like $1,000 to work backstage or less than that, probably 500. I don't know.
I would have been shocked beyond belief if he was getting $1,000 from TNA, but hey, I wasn't doing their accounting. I don't know.
All right, so we'll say 500. He was just happy to be working in wrestling again, and when the weekly pay-per-views go away, and he goes away too, which is a shame. So back to this, and we have Shane Douglas being told by Dusty he gets the night off. Leanne becomes the new backstage announcer. Then we have Johnny Swinger and I think this was Joey Matthews.
Nope.
I don't know.
You wouldn't believe it because it took me a minute and I actually I remembered this group. You want me to tell you who it was?
Who was with Trinity and Johnny Swinger?
It was the Disco Inferno.
I couldn't recognize him. He looked completely different.
Yeah. They had a stable of Disco Inferno, Johnny Swinger. Originally, Simon Diamond was in there, but then Simon turned babyface and now was the Irish Saint Pat Kenny or some stupid shit like that. And then, in case you're curious, we're talking about Trinity. We're not talking about Naomi. No, this is different Trinity. This is stunt woman who was Jennifer Garner's stunt double in Daredevil Trinity. She was also in WWE for 5 minutes as the manager of Little Guido and Tony Mamaluke during the new ECW.
And then she was like, I could get more money doing stunt work, so she powders.
Yes. Dusty brings Leanne in to take over Shane Douglas for the interview. Swinger says 6 words. Trinity, I think, says 5 words. And then Dusty kicks them out to cut his own promo, which was allegedly a plug for Turning Point, but it was about 95% about how great Dusty is. And then he asks her to kiss him. And she's just like, no. No. Good for you, Leanne Tweeden. Bad for you, Dusty.
Okay, thank God all of that's over with, because guess what?
It was finally time for fucking wrestling?
Yep. We get thrown to today in Don West, and Alex Shelley comes out and faces off against AJ Styles.
Like, oh my God, here's some professional wrestling. And suddenly I'm complaining a lot less. Now, we should note, like, this wasn't even a Ring of Honor AJ Styles Alex Shelley match, because they would have gotten a lot more time than this. This was here because this show was about putting over the faces of TNA. AJ Styles is a face of TNA. And so it's important that he gets screen time, he gets a win, and that's what happened here. He wins in 2 minutes with a Styles Clash, and I call this a video game match because they basically did as many moves as they could in about 2 minutes. I know,
which is exactly what we said earlier about, Impact, the 60-minute Impact shows, especially during the Fox Sports era, because they had like 5 matches or 6 matches a show, and like 2 or 3 of them were X Division matches, and they usually went 2-3 minutes.
Now, before we move on to the post-match angle, I want to note something that Don West said. And this actually, in a weird way, plays into the post-match angle. Because Don West says that Alex Shelley is one of the few wrestlers in the company who can be competitive to AJ because he has a completely different style. And at this point, I was just trying to figure out who the hell else in TNA has the same exact style as AJ Styles. And the first name I thought of was Abyss, which is obviously a joke because if you pick somebody with the exact opposite style of AJ Styles, it'd be fucking Abyss. And Cyndi, who comes out after the match to attack AJ Styles?
Triton.
There you go. Ryan Wilson returned. Actually, he debuted 4 months before he debuted. And he comes out and attacks AJ Styles, and he plants his giant stick through AJ's heart, and AJ dies, and we never see him again. And this joke took a real dark turn.
Yep. You poor unfortunate souls. All right. Real thing. Rewind. Arya predicts it. AJ gets jumped by Abyss. Gets a shock treatment. Abyss then tries to powerbomb AJ through a table. AJ counters it, but instead gets chokeslammed through a table.
Yes. Abyss, apparently Chris Rose didn't have $100 in his fanny pack that Tom Arnold and Jeff Jarrett stole from him because Abyss gave Chris Rose back. But Abyss did become a babyface for about 2 seconds because I thought he was going to take all those fucking people out. Because he went and menaced the best damn people.
And then Tom was playing babyface because he helped AJ get up.
Yes. Well, throughout the show, they count down the top 5 TNA moments up to this point. And I know the company's been around for 2 years, but they've had a lot of really good in-ring wrestling. Like we talked about that great ladder match last week. So you might be thinking, okay, they're going to show some match stuff. Raven debuted that time. So like one of the big moments will probably be Raven debuting and attacking Jeff Jarrett. and all this other crazy, wacky shit that has happened in the first 2 years, there's exactly one moment of these top 5 moments that has something even remotely tied into in-ring wrestling. And I'm just going to list all 5 of them here. And we've only seen one of them so far. Actually, we've only seen 2 of them so far.
Yeah, we've seen 2.
Number 5, Ryan Urlacher of the Chicago Bears press slams Johnny Fairplay of Survivor out of the ring in a moment that TNA made a really big deal about, and the Chicago Bears were really pissed off about. Because you're not allowed to be doing things like this when you're a professional athlete. Number 4, which honestly, of all the things on this list that should be on this list as a non-wrestling moment, this should be on here. The moment when Jeff Jarrett flew to Japan to hit Hulk Hogan with a guitar, which was supposed to lead to Jarrett versus Hogan. And the next thing we know was Hogan was back in WWE. Shocking how that happens. Number 3, Jeff Jarrett gets his ass kicked by the Tennessee Titans.
Which was an interesting moment. And when that happened, Malice had to step in and make sure Jeff Jarrett didn't die.
Yes. We talked about that a few months ago. In fact, I even clipped the segment we talked about it and put it up early. So if you want to go check that out, go check that out. Number 2, which legitimately is on this list because of who it is, Chris Rock showed up.
I'm trying to rack my brain as to why Chris Rock showed up. He had to have promoted like a pay-per-view special or something.
No, they were Chris Rock was filming his movie Head of State and needed a wrestling scene, and WWE sure as hell was going to let them do it there. So they filmed the scene with Chris Rock, and then Chris Rock stayed and did that little skit on the pay-per-view.
Oh.
Did you ever see that movie? It wasn't as awful as it might sound.
It was okay. I think I did a review for it in high school.
Yep. And then number 1, which honestly, this we said this at the time, this may be the most replayed moment in TNA history. And this is a company that isn't very good at replaying big moments. But this one is probably the most replayed moment in TNA history. The very first show, Toby Keith showing up and giving Jeff Jarrett a suplex.
Yep.
Because it also shows you exactly how much mainstream attention gets you, because that got aired. I remember seeing it on actual TV shows at the time, because like it was a big fucking deal, because Toby Keith was a big fucking deal at the time. And it led to fewer and fewer people buying the TNA pay-per-views. So tells you everything you need to know, right?
Exactly.
And that is also the only time we get anything remotely wrestling related in that top 5 list. Unless you want to count the Tennessee Titans kicking the shit out of Jeff Jarrett.
Or Bryan Urlacher press slamming Johnny Fairplay under red shirt security.
I mean, to be fair, that wasn't a match. I guess Jarrett getting his ass kicked by the Titans wasn't a match either, but you know.
There was wrestling adjacent.
Yes.
All right.
So
I thought one.
Did you say you do this one?
Yeah, because you might get angry again.
Angry adjacent, we'll call it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So Tom Arnold is refereeing the match between Tio and Puppet. He's checking in on both of them. He goes to Tio, pats him down, takes some money because he's a scumbag. He then brings out a bunch of kids' toys and small items for Tio to use in a brawl against Puppet. I was very weirded out by this. I did not like this segment.
Wait. That was money that he took? I thought that was a switchblade.
No, it was money.
I was like, wow, we can't let him have a switchblade for the Anything Goes match. But Actually, it's like, okay, the toys thing was stupid, but he also had like a metal truck. I'm like, you know what? That would fucking hurt if you used that on Puppet.
Yeah. Also a little
Uh,
saucepan too, which I actually have that saucepan.
I believe it. But yeah, I thought it was a switchblade. I'm like, oh, so he can't have a switchblade, but he can brain him with a metal pickup truck, which I guess is better than using a switchblade.
I guess.
So, do you remember our next person being in the fucking company at the time?
No.
Johnny B. Bad was on TV. Johnny B. Bad last seen as a regular in wrestling in 1998. He lost to Gilbert and then disappeared off WWF television until essentially he got fired. But he left the company with his wife, Sable. Then he got divorced from his wife, Sable. Then Sable went and married Brock Lesnar. And then somehow he ends up back here in fucking TNA for like a month. Like when he showed up, I'm like, oh yeah, he was here for like a month. And he is here to promote the Ultimate X match. And I'm like, if he has ever seen an Ultimate X match, I will donate $1,000 to his church. He also, by the way, he's interviewed by Leanne, which I guess I lied when I said this was that Leanne being forced to interview Dusty was her only interview, because she interviews Johnny B. fucking Bad, who talks about her ass. Very religious man, this Johnny B. Bad. I imagine it's in the Bible somewhere. Thou shalt talk about hot women's asses.
By the way, I looked it up. He's there in TNA from September 2004 to the end of the year.
That just doesn't seem right. That just I okay then.
He also was in a dark match for Final Resolution 2005.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know this all happened, but none of this happened. You know what I mean? But by the way, it does get noted, and we'll talk later about how wonderful this is. But they talk the entire show about the main event is an Ultimate X match. Now, you, dear listener, may be wondering, hey, who is in this Ultimate X match? What a great question. So up next, we had Kid Kash in Dallas versus America's Most Wanted. And this is where it became obvious to me that the whole point, at least of this week's show and probably next week's show, was they just wanted to get their key guys on the show and expose them to what would theoretically be a new audience, because I did not believe that anybody became a fan of TNA watching these shows. I was wrong, but I was screaming at this match a little bit too, because they wrestle for 2 minutes and it's fine. They go to commercial, which, okay, that's a TNA staple. We come back from commercial, and once we come back, we have to go to a replay because during the commercial, Bryan Cox held Kid Kash to get beat on. This is a taped show, and they put the celebrity involvement during the commercial break that had to be replayed afterwards.
TNA.
Kash uses a frog splash on Storm. Harris breaks up the pin. The heels collide with one another, and Harris spears Kash for the win after Storm super kicks Lance Archer off the apron. It was a perfectly fine TV match. I imagine Kid Kash, who has an ego the size of Texas, was not thrilled about doing such a quick job here. But, you know, there's a reason that even with all that fucking talent, Kid Kash only made it so far in wrestling.
Yep.
And was it was a little bit due to his size, just a little bit. But he was like, honestly, he was low key levels of asshole without, being as good as low key. And then, okay, so now is when I finally figured out what the hell's going on with this horse game. Because Chris Rose pitches it to 3LK, 3 Live Crew, who's BG James, Ron Killings, and Conan, preparing for a game of horse. And that's who John Salley is really going to play in horse. And that's where the two girls from earlier come in, is that if John Salley wins, he's going to become the promoter of the Two Hot Girls. If John Salley loses, he's going to become the promoter of 3 Live Crew. What the fuck did that mean, is what I was writing in big, stupid letters. And why did 3 Live Crew want him to be their promoter?
You'll find out next week.
Well, after another commercial break, we are now 30 minutes in, and it's time for Tenay and West to talk about how great TNA is. This should have been a lot closer to the beginning of the show than the middle of the show. They're literally just here for about 14 seconds talking about how great TNA is and, how wonderful TNA is and how you can see all this great wrestling action. And then Tom Arnold cuts him off to talk to Don West about hot chicks. And then get a recap of the Jeff Jarrett, Jeff Hardy ladder match, which you might sit and see, oh man, they showed 4 seconds of clips of the actual match. I bet Arya's pissed about that. No, Arya's seen the match. Arya thinks the 4 seconds of clips were for the best. And the finish...
Victory Road 2004. It was bundled. I remember it bundled with 2 other DVDs. I think it was It was either Turning Point or Final Resolution and Lockdown 2005.
Yep. I remember. I remember that 3-pack in Walmart. But it's like, the funny thing is, and this will really tell you the state of wrestling in 2004, it was a bad show, but based on WWE standards, it was amazing by comparison, because WWE was really blowing goats at this point. But for those who remember, like the great TNA monthly pay-per-views, that starts next month. That starts in December. That was when
it's fantastic.
Yes. And then Final Resolution and Against All Odds were all great. Destination X sucked donkey dick. Lockdown was really good, but overshadowed by Tragedy. And that summer where they were off Fox Sports Net, were just doing Impact on the website and then a monthly pay-per-view. Those were the fucking best pay-per-views they ever did.
Yeah, because this is around the time they did Unbreakable.
Yeah. Stay alive, damn it. That's when they brought in Samoa Joe. And, like, honestly, it's when they decided, hey, we're off TV for a couple months until Spike TV gives Raw the boot. Nobody's going to buy these damn pay-per-views, so we might as well just put on, we might as well just make it Ring of Honor, under the guise of TNA, just have, 3 hours of really good wrestling matches. And shockingly, people enjoyed those. We then go to Jeff Hammond in an empty arena talking to Jeff Jarrett. And because TNA has to be the 3rd or 4th tier wrestling, the first thing Jeff Hammond says is Jeff Jarrett is a former WWF Intercontinental Champion and former WCW Champion, with his NWA title wins being 3rd tier. We couldn't even just ignore it and say he's a multiple-time NWA champion, or even here's the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Jeff, You've had a long career, a long successful career here in TNA, but also in WWF and WCW. Like acknowledging it, but making sure that TNA is the main thing you want to focus on, because we're not watching WWF Impact. We're not watching WCW Impact. We're watching TNA Impact. And, so TNA should be the most important thing we're watching. And this is a repeated thing that happens in over 22 years of this company. But anyway, Jarrett does talk about how great the NWA is and the evolution of TNA from day one. And it was nice. It did, I understand it. And I imagine probably everyone watching it is like watching Vince McMahon as an announcer in the 90s. Like, the guy owns the company. It's like, so watching Jeff Jarrett, it's weird because he's the super duper heel who hates TNA management, but you also know he's the guy in charge. So, but it's still a weird choice to have him do the let's talk about how great the company is and how far we've come, gimmick.
I think it's also because they're not talking to the traditional TNA audience. They're talking to this casual audience who was watching Best Damn, which at the time was getting like 10 times the ratings of Impact. I think Impact was getting like 80,000 viewers. Best Damn usually got around 800,000.
Yeah, and not yet, but we'll get to my biggest rant and rave here in a little bit about this. But so to add to I still don't know what the hell was going on about this horse game thing. At this point, I discovered that John Salley will apparently have mystery partners in his game of horse against 3 Live Crew. I was okay. Maybe I'm just being the awful person who just, not giving these guys a chance and just wants to nitpick everything. At what point did you realize what the point of this horse game was? Did you know that this was a 3-on-3 horse game?
I thought it was like 1-on-2. It was BG and Conan against John Salley. Because Killings isn't there.
See, and I guess you're right, but I told myself that Ron Killings was there in the earlier skits. But now that you say it, I don't think he actually ever was, but I just accepted that he was there, because why wouldn't he be? But then we get, hey, Bad Influence explodes 7 years before they actually become a team. Frankie Kazarian with Tracy Brooks in his corner versus the fallen angel Christopher Daniels. And I watched a little bit of Impact at the time, so I know Triple X were back and forth between babyface and heel. So when this got taped, I don't remember if Triple X was already were still babyfaces or if they had turned heel yet for their feud with AMW. But by the time it aired, Daniels is definitely a heel, but Kazarian is also a heel. But the crowd is also cheering for Daniels, which I thought was weird. But either way, this was a fun little match. And like I said, everything that was in the ring, for the most part, was great. It's fun watching, random wrestling like this. And the finish, Tracy distracted the referee after Daniels hit the best moonsault ever. Michael Shane runs in because he's Kazarian's partner. We got a heel miscommunication spot, and Daniels pins Kaz after an Angel's Wings. Shane attacks after the bell, and Skipper makes the save. So Triple X stands tall. And even though they didn't say this, I'm assuming this leads to a tag team match on night 2. Am I right about that?
Yep.
Okay, good. So, hey, simple booking. But
not on night 2. That happened on Impact.
Really? But they were both heels by that point. Oh, whatever.
Yeah.
But that 2 or 3 minutes was too much wrestling. Tom Arnold, I don't even know who he was talking about, but he compares one of them to someone from American History X. And I'm like, I don't know if he's talking about Chris Daniels because he's a bald white guy. I don't know if he's talking about Elix Skipper because he's a black guy. I don't
Skipper.
know. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Because he just, I mean, sadly, this was not the worst thing Tom Arnold says on this show in the guise of wrestling commentary. So back to the basketball court. Conan introduces Shark Boy and D-Ray 3000 as John Sally's partners for Horse. And I think everyone knows who Shark Boy is, but for those who don't remember D-Ray 3000, I don't know if he ever did anything else in wrestling, but he had a brief run in TNA as an enhancement talent, and he's best remembered for being a small, skinny guy with the biggest fucking afro you've ever seen.
Essentially, I also remember him, and we're jumping around. We're going to talk about this in 2 years. When Goldilocks goes insane over Eric Watts' money and starts collecting wrestlers' contracts. The first two she gets are Shark Boy and D-Ray 3000. And she keeps him caged up.
That honestly sounds like it could be interesting, which is sad that I would say that. So I just remember Shark Boy teaming with New Jack, which is sadly not on this show.
No.
Because again, if New Jack was going to be on the show, there was a much better spot for him. So then Tom Arnold is fucking running all over the place. He should have lost about 75 pounds just taping this show for all the running he's doing here. He's backstage now to explain the rules of the. Actually, no, it's not. That was earlier with T.O. He's backstage with the referees, the other regular TNA referees, to talk about the rules of the little person match. Somehow, low blows are not allowed in this hardcore match. And then Tom Arnold thought that somehow the match had something to do with hardcore pornography. This match has nothing to do with hardcore pornography. And if it was, why did Tom Arnold want to take part in the mini men's hardcore pornography segment?
I facepalmed throughout this entire segment.
This is like honestly, like there's a lot of this show is the stuff that when someone walks in and talks about how stupid wrestling is, this is the stuff you don't want them to walk in and see you watching.
Yep.
And yeah. So then we get Raven versus Ron the Truth Killings, which is where I noted that I guess Truth isn't too worried about the basketball game because he's wrestling instead of getting ready. And then, oh boy, take a deep seat for this one, Cyndi, because up next, during this match, was the only time during the show, the only time that they plug TNA Impact. Because they say in passing that this week on Impact, we're going to get another big top star debuting in the company. Who, by the way, if I remember correctly, is Diamond Dallas Page. However, you know what would have been helpful? For them to actually tell you, what day Impact is on, which is Friday, but I think, they may have said like this week on Impact or maybe even this Friday. But either way.
They said Friday.
Okay. So in passing, they do plug the day that this show is on. But you know what they don't mention? What time is the show on?
That is easily explainable.
I get like it's fucking whatchamacallit. It's Fox Sports Net. So depending on your local sports because it's November, so there's no baseball. But if there's a sporting event, it may get bumped around. But the time that it's supposed to air is either 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Either way, it never got plugged. It never got plugged. They didn't even say check your local listings for a time. They just said once in passing this Friday on Impact. So unless you're Cyndi, who again managed to become a TNA fan out of this, like if you like this show, and you wanted to watch more Impact, you wanted to watch more TNA, like you were given no reason or no way to go now and watch it.
My problem is I couldn't barely watch it because most of the time it was preempted for the Sonics basketball.
And like admittedly, at some point, I know they start putting in some replays at like midnight and other times, so it's a little more accessible to the average person. But yeah, like this is just like honestly, this should have been them hammering it home. Like we Impactors every Friday here on Fox Sports Net. There should have been a crawler saying that. Like they had a lot of crawls on this show, telling you what's happening later on this show, telling you what's happening tomorrow. They mentioned Turning Point a half a dozen times, which was nice. But again, they didn't ever mention that, oh yeah, our main show airs this day at this time in the afternoon. So go check it out. And I just thought that was, TNA being TNA, we'll say.
Or Best Damn being Best Damn. Either one works.
Oh,
God. This match was nothing.
Oh, yeah. Like, this was honestly the worst match on the show. Like, I don't know. I think, I don't know what was worse. Oh, yeah, I guess it really wasn't the worst. Of the matches you're supposed to take seriously, this was the worst match on the show.
Yep.
Like Raven, I think honestly, I'm going to blame Raven for this. I think he was just having a really bad day because I think Truth is, quite a bit better than this. Because at one point they just awkwardly fall into each other, and then each man misses their finish, and Truth rolls him up for the win. And by the way, I think I said this, but I believe the person who debuts on Impact is Diamond Dallas Page.
That is true.
Because I know he came in for a few months and then got let go because he made a big stink about losing a match to Monty Brown on pay-per-view.
Who, DDP?
Yeah. Because it was after Monty Brown turned heel and it was a tag team match. And honestly, you could give me an hour and I'll never guess who their partners were. And the finish was supposed to be Monty Brown pinning DDP. And he put up a big stink, so to bring in, oh my God, those two big fat guys that they did an angle with, the one time, Big Sal or something.
Phi Delta Slam?
Yes, them. They had to bring them in to distract DDP to lead to the win. And Page got fired. But yeah. So then we get actually let me see here. Oh yeah. So Tom Arnold goes in the Puppet's dressing room, calls him little man, and for once I won't blame Tom Arnold for this because it's a completely innocuous statement, and honestly, I don't care if he had no idea who the hell Puppet was. It was a perfect thing for him to be saying to Puppet, was calling him little man, because Puppet, being Puppet, it's like, what the fuck did you call me, asshole? Of course, he didn't actually say that, but we're embellishing here. But so Puppet and Tom Arnold are getting into it, and they needed to be pulled apart. And Puppet, by the way, would have totally kicked his fucking ass. Just saying that. Any comments on the Tom Arnold Puppet altercation?
this would lead. He also quipped that Puppet has rabies. I quip, the Cosmic Ballet goes on. Meanwhile, we'll get this next part over with as well. John Salley asked Shark Boy to make a layup. If this was Stone Cold Shark Boy back in 2009, he would have won. But since this is 2004 Shark Boy, he lost and now has to manage or promote 3 Live Crew tomorrow night.
So I noted a little, slightly more than that. I noted they said we're going to get the conclusion of the horse game after commercial break. And I'm like, they haven't even started the goddamn thing. And somehow during the commercial break, it went from not even having started to both teams having 4 letters and Conan having made a layup that Shark Boy has to now, imitate. And Shark Boy failed. And not that I wanted to watch 20 minutes of basketball segments, but it makes me wonder, like, how much of this did they really tape? And, like, that was all that they could use.
Well, knowing where they were, they probably couldn't afford that much.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So they go back to the table, and Chris Rose is asking the 2 hot girls if they want to go back with him now, and they're like, no. And I'm like, I wouldn't want to do that either, girls. I wouldn't want to do that either. So Chris Rose, who we have ridiculed, was the most PC person on the show because he's the only person that called the upcoming match a mini match. Everyone else used the word that I have to use the disclaimer every time we talk about these types of matches because sensibilities in 2004 are not sensibilities in 2024, and words that were used then are not okay to use nowadays. And yes, they use the slang for a little person. Mm-hmm. Except for Chris Rose, who's the one and only person that called it a mini match. And I'm like, of all the people on this show to be PC. So Tom Arnold is the guest referee for this match between Puppet and T.O., and he was the most biased referee since Earl Hebner in Montreal. He just flat out, helped T.O. to a very quick win. Puppet picked T.O. up at one point. Tom Arnold pulls him right down. They give him a double clothesline, and then Arnold counts 3 with the microphone in his hand, hitting Puppet in the head with it each time. And I noted that I guess this means that T.O. retains the Dupp Cup.
Oh, crap, I forgot about that.
Yes. So even though they did not fight to 10 points, T.O. is the, I don't know if he's the linear Dupp Cup champion, but he is, in TNA canon, he's the Dupp Cup champion. And he retained the championship spittoon here. And now with this over, well, I guess I'm lying. I was going to say now with this over, we will never see Puppet and T.O. ever again, but that is a lie. Because after the match, Puppet challenges Tom Arnold to a match. And yes, next week on this very podcast, in that very ring, Puppet is going to wrestle Tom Arnold in what part of me thinks that it's going to be the greatest clusterfuck of all time, and part of me is worried that they will not let it become that, and thus the match will be worse because of it.
I have seen it. I have my notes. I will not spoil.
So you're not going to tell me if it's awful in a good way or a bad way?
Nope.
Because let's be honest, this is not going to be a good match. But the only saving grace is if it's awful in a good way. So then, because we're now 50 plus minutes in the show, I should note that I'm sitting here before the Raven R-Truth match, it's over 40 minutes into a 64-minute show, and I'm like, okay, there's still 3 matches to go. And what the hell? But yeah, it helps when none of the matches go longer than 2 minutes, I guess. But so the best damn people plug what they're going to do tomorrow night. And then we get the Ultimate X match. And you might recall, I said earlier in the show, we're going to have an Ultimate X match. And you might wonder who the participants are. And I began talking about Kid Kash in Dallas versus America's Most Wanted. That's because at no point did they ever tell us who was going to be in the Ultimate X match. And the match, the Ultimate X match, is Sanjay Dutt, Primetime Elix Skipper, and Chris Sabin. And I'll be honest, like, hey, that sounds like a hell of an Ultimate X match, to be perfectly honest. But here's where the asterisks come in. They say the winner is going to get an X Division title match at Turning Point. The problem with that is they had already plugged the America's Most Wanted Triple X match, so that automatically eliminates 1/3 of the participants from being in that match. Plus, this was put in after the fact. So I imagine the people who watched this as they recorded did not know that Sabin was wrestling for such a prestigious championship opportunity. Now, Jeff Hammond, who is the guy who's affiliated with NASCAR, we talked about him earlier talking to Jeff Jarrett. He's like one of these people, it's like, I think he was with Fox Sports Net, but he was actually a wrestling fan and would occasionally do shit in TNA. And he did commentary. And he was perfectly fine. However, he was not the only guest commentator for this match. Somebody somewhere decided that Tom Arnold needed to be a guest commentator for this match. And somebody also decided that Tom Arnold should not have a format sheet that tells him who was in the match, who they are, which person is which, any kind of defining characteristic that could help him commentate and not be a total douchebag that ruined what was actually a pretty good little 7-minute Ultimate X match.
Right. I have it listed here. The match is great. ... on mute. Tom's commentary ruined the match. And this is somebody who was a fan of Best Damn at the time. He ruined it.
Yes. You might. Now, I imagine most people listening to this, at the very least, you know who Chris Sabin is. You know who Sanjay Dutt is. You probably know who Elix Skipper is. And one defining characteristic that, to be honest, like most normal people would, like if they noticed it, wouldn't be something you would keep talking about over and over again. But you might notice that each of them are a different race. You might also notice that each of them have a name. Tom Arnold distinguished them by one of those things. And we wouldn't be talking about it if I was saying that he was calling them by their name. Nope. He was talking about the black guy, the Indian guy, and the white guy in those terms. And at no point did Mike Tenay, Don West, or Jeff Hammond even attempt to fill him in on what their names were. Nobody was in his ear saying what their names were, or if they were, he was basically like, fuck this, I don't care. And nobody thought to turn off his microphone at some point. But yes, he talked about how great the black guy's body was. He said the Indian guy has a good body too. And he talked about how the white guy wasn't wearing a cup. This was the expert commentary by Tom Arnold. So Skipper does his rope walk hurricanrana, and this was how Arnold noted that Sabin wasn't wearing a cup. Sanjay does a moonsault up the lighting rigs. Skipper and Sanjay climbed the ropes at one point, just close enough together so that Sabin could do a missile drop kick and knock them both off, which was really cool. And let's see here as we go here. So at one point, Skipper picks up Sabin for a body slam. So Skipper's arms are completely immobile, or they're full of another person. And Sanjay Dutt decides now is the best time to shimmy across the cable and try something heroic, like winning the match. However, through no assistance of Elix Skipper, because Elix seemed to be just fine with watching him scoot on by and win the match, Sanjay drops into perfect position to be powerbombed by Elix Skipper while he body slammed Chris Sabin, which is a cool spot as long as you shut your brain off and ignore the fact that Sanjay Dutt essentially gave himself a power bomb.
Yeah.
So the finish saw all three in the middle. Sabin knocked them both off and ripped down the X, because this was before they grew a brain and, put a clip there for people to undo the X. By the sounds of it, it was Velcroed on. So thankfully the damn thing didn't fall down. But yeah, Sabin wins. And we'll now go on to Turning Point to wrestle Petey Williams for the X Division title in what was a really fucking good match. And I was shocked to hear that.
It was a fantastic match. I have it listed as an 8 out of 10 on mute.
Oh yeah, I didn't rate any of the matches. I didn't bother.
Well, can I go quickly over the match ratings that I had?
Of course.
First match, 4 out of 10, which is sacrilege, I know. Tag match, 5 out of 10.
It's a 2-minute match between AJ and Alex Shelley.
Yeah.
They could have had a 4-star match if they had 15 minutes, but they were not going to get 15 minutes on this show.
No. The tag match, 5 out of 10. Kazarian and Daniels, 5 out of 10. Raven and Ron Killings, 3 out of 10. Tio versus Puppet with Tom Arnold as ref, 1 out of 10. And Ultimate X, 8 out of 10 on mute, 5 out of 10 having to listen to Tom Arnold.
Yep. And the show ends with the 5 hosts plugging tomorrow's show. I note the positives of the show. The positives were there were a lot of fun wrestling action. 3 X Division matches, and as long as you ignore everything else on the show, it was a good show. The negatives on the show were that you were not supposed to ignore everything else on the show. And as I mentioned earlier, that made it embarrassing to watch. And I noted that if this was 2004 and I was a new viewer, I could not imagine this show making me want to watch TNA again. And I somehow managed, and I talk about these TNA weekly pay-per-views where I write 13 pages of shit. It's like I wrote 1,934 words about this show. And that was without writing down my Jeff Jarrett. So that was the Best Damn Sports Show period, Best Damn Wrestling Special period, part 1. And Cyndi claims that next week's show is better. And I hope she's telling the truth.
Here's the card. They talked about some of this. John Salley will be managing 3 Live Crew. Abyss versus AJ Styles happens.
Makes sense.
Tom Arnold versus Puppet.
I mean, again, I'm like hoping that it is completely awful in the best possible way.
The Naturals versus Bryan Cox and his mystery partner.
Who could it be?
And in the main event, Jeff Jarrett versus Jeff Hardy in a 6 Sides of Steel match.
I wonder who will win that.
I think a person named Jeff is going to win that match.
May the best Jeff win.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is actually, I think, the longest show you and I have done. ironically, about the shortest show you and I have ever done.
Well, we had a lot to talk about on this show, and sometimes it makes the most fun. We'll have less to talk about on the next show because we spent a lot of the show dealing with a lot of some of the setup and your epic Jeff Jarrett rant.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we go our separate ways, do you have anything you want to plug for the fine listening audience?
I launched a new YouTube channel called the GSG Archive. I am uploading parts of my collection up there of old vintage game shows, so feel free to check that out.
And what was the name of that show again? Or the name of that channel?
GSG Archive.
There you go. Go check that out right now. Subscribe right now. And if you don't, I'll be very disappointed in you. But so yeah, that's it for this week's show. Thank you all for listening. Hope you all enjoyed it. And we'll talk to you again in 7 days.